The starfield looked like cracked glass through the viewport of Odysseus II, a scattered lattice of cold diamonds stretched across the black. Even at a distance of 270 light-years, Kepler-18's faint amber glow felt intimate, like the last ember of some immense, half-forgotten hearth. Commander Layla Reyes thumbed the rim of her mug, watching the specks blur into a pale disk on the long-range display. This was the fruit of 3 generations' worth of silence and hope, a mission born from a desperate mixture of human curiosity, geopolitics, and a funding bill passed in the last breath of the old century. They had been sent to Kepler-18b on a single, almost absurd promise that the transit anomalies recorded by the orbiters might betray something anomalous, something worth bending light-years in ethics for. The crew was small, 9 souls squeezed into carbon and ceramic, each with a web of specialties that read like a small university department. Layla's second, Haruki Sato, kept both the engines and the crew's tempers in check. Dr. Amira Patel was the xenobiologist whose gentle hands could coax secrets from microbes and keep a temper with politicians. Jamal Okonkwo, the systems engineer, joked that he could make toast with a fusion core, and the mission scientist, Elena Voss, carried an old atlas of speculative cosmology and an even older grief she never spoke of. They were not the first to find anomalies around Kepler-18b. A decade earlier, a probe had signaled an inconsistency in the planet's reflected spectrum, tiny, repeating modulations that fit no known natural pattern. For a while governments argued about resources and prestige. Then a private coalition offered a vessel. Then a treaty. Then, finally, a launch window. Humanity had sent a hand across the ocean of stars and leaned into the dark to touch something new. Kepler-18b was uglier in person than the thumbnail images suggested. A battered, molten wind-sculpted orb, it lay close to its star and wore a cracked, iridescent crust. Vast basins of glass-like minerals stretched between black ridgelines that chimed faintly in the wind. The planet exhaled vapor that tasted of metallic dust in Odysseus II's sensors. Yet among the jagged basalt and the frozen glass, anomalous geometry rose, straight lines and right angles impossible in ordinary geology, terraces, tessellations, a stair-step concourse carved from fused rock. Someone, or something, had arranged the land. They touched down at dawn. Layla's boots sank into a film of fine vitreous silt and left prints that feared to remain. The team set up a perimeter, instruments humming a serious blue, data streaming back to Earth in fits and bursts. Early samples showed complex polymer residues, arrangements of molecules not seen in any known biosphere. Dr. Patel's eyes widened at microscopic lattices that seemed to rearrange under the microscope, an architecture that was active and, unnervingly, purposeful. They found the first door like one might stumble across a secret in the middle of a familiar room. It was not built of metal, but of negative space. A depression in the earth, a ring of dark, glossy basalt set in a perfect circle, sat among the terraces. Away from it the ground was rough, but inside the ring the light behaved wrong, photons bent like water around a stone. Jamal ran a probe and the probe reported impossible things. Time markers shifted in microseconds the instant it crossed the threshold, its spectral signature smeared and returned with strange harmonics. Elena, trembling with triumph and something like reverence, called it a portal before any consensus was reached. It was a word the press would seize and a word that made every heart on Odysseus II run cold and hot in equal measure. They recorded. They sampled. They sent a drone through the ring. For 7 long minutes there was silence. The link buffered and blinked. Then, like a small mouth opening, the feed came alive. The drone's camera showed a corridor, impossible geometry tiled with shifting prisms. Farther, the shapes resolved into structures that looked like architecture, but not the kind that grows from habitation and necessity. These were sculptures in programmatic symmetry, like a crystalline brain expanded into space. And in that space, the drone shimmered as if dust motes had decided to move with intent. Something observed it. Something acknowledged its presence. The drone came back carrying data the scientists could not immediately parse, electromagnetic signatures arranged in an intelligence protocol, a packet of information that seemed to say, simply, "We know you are there." They argued on the surface for hours. Political officers wanted to close and report, to secure the location under treaty and let committees argue for a century. Elena wanted to return, to send a crew. Jamal wanted to run more diagnostics. Layla had to make the choice that would become the fulcrum of history. She chose to step through. They trained quickly, inertial dampers, environmental seals, the small talismans of human calculation. Layla did not wear a Bible, she wore a folded photograph of a boy with a gap-toothed smile who was waiting on Earth. She took Haruki and Dr. Patel with her. The rest stayed behind, a tether of radio voices and human caution. Walking into the ring felt like walking into a held breath. The air on the other side tasted of ozone and old iron and something else, like wet stone. They emerged into a chamber not of rock, but of designed possibility. Light bent into planes, shadows were layered with sound. They had expected alien flora, perhaps strange fauna. What met them instead was a city of research. It was not a city of buildings, but of instruments, each more intricate and implausible than the other. Towers of translucent lattice functioned like resonators, fields of suspended filaments hummed like strings in the throat of a giant. Panels opened to reveal schematics that rearranged themselves to accommodate new inputs, a living research catalog. Small, compact devices moved through the air like schooling fish, leaving trails of scattered photons that registered as data and vanished, and there were aliens. They did not approach like monsters in old stories, they approached like colleagues stepping into a hall for the first time. Their forms were hard to describe without bruising language, elongated limbs whose ends spread like gossamer palms, torsos that rippled with a soft bioluminescent grid, heads that sat slightly askew, crowned in delicate filigree. Their faces, if the term applied, were placid, as if time had taught them the economy of expressions. One of them stopped and turned those placid faces toward the humans. It made a sound, not a word but an arrangement of tones, bell-like and belligerent all at once, and the room stilled. A panel emitted a ribbon of light which coalesced into a pattern that might have been speech. We are the lattice. The pattern translated into their heads, a shape of thought that slid like taffy into comprehension. The translation came not as voice but as a bloom of meaning, the strange gift of the lattice's interface, a direct mapping of intention into mind. We maintain the ways. You are first from the distant sun. Speak. Elena's breath came quick and hot. We are from Earth, she said, and the lattice painted the concept into her mind, mortal, carbon-based, from a pale blue dot. The alien's meaning carried neither malice nor indulgence. They asked questions. How did you open the ring? What do you seek? Their interest was clinical, seasoned with an ancestral curiosity. Like a scientist's, they explained themselves haltingly: probes, a drone, the strange harmonics. The lattice listened, and then, to the horror and astonishment of the humans, it transmitted the outline of a map. It was not a star map in the sense humans understood. Instead, it was a diagram of a network, nodes and channels. Each node pulsed with a different signature, some throbbing slowly like a heartbeat, others flickering with information like a city at night. The lattice's pattern conveyed the truth in a manner that left no room for poetic translation. The ring on Kepler-452b was a nexus, one gate in a lattice of portals that connected planets across the interstellar gulf. The lattice maintained this network, a web of ways, and used it for research, trade, and the quiet exchange of ideas. The name Lattice, they learned, was only a human simplification. The alien collective thought of itself as an organization of study and stewardship, an ancient guild that curated portals like libraries curating books. They had watched stellar births and deaths, stitched knowledge from countless species, and maintained a code of passage. The portals were not simple doorways, they were complex machines that tuned spacetime itself to allow discrete packets of matter and information to bridge impossible distances. The Lattice's members had dedicated themselves to understanding and protecting that system. The implications were seismic. Here, standing in a chamber that housed instruments older than the language to name them, the NASA crew realized humanity had stumbled into the control room of something that rendered distance meaningless. The Lattice offered, in their calm and mercilessly efficient way, access, but not without protocol. You may travel, the thought shape said. But transit is not neutral. The ways are study and stewardship. Entry requires understanding. Passage without consent disrupts balances. Are you prepared to bind yourselves to a covenant? The Lattice's offering read like a contract written in a voice that touched the mind rather than a pen. It was precise, and it contained possibilities in bars. To use the ways freely would demand reciprocity, custodianship, and recognition of the Lattice's guardianship. Haruki, pragmatic and blunt, interrupted the shimmering lexicon with a harder question: what do you require of us? Lattice replied with an image of a ledger with columns of light, exchanges, data, specimens, the right to observe and document, and, crucially, safeguards, quarantine protocols, cultural non-interference, and a stewardship oath that, once taken, could not be easily abandoned. On Earth, the political calculus would be ugly and immediate. A single faction could weaponize a portal. Corporations might build empires around transit rights. Yet here, in that room of impossible light, such concerns were abstractions in the face of an ancient practice. The Lattice had itself policed civilizations, sometimes intervening to prevent catastrophe. Their methods were not benevolent by human standards. They spoke plainly of species that misused transit and threatened to collapse nodes, of cultures that had been severed from the network as punishment. The Lattice's eyes, or equivalents, held no sentiment for human idealism. They were custodians. As the first negotiation lengthened, Dr. Patel found herself absorbed by the specimens housed in suspended arrays, living cells preserved through the way's peculiar stasis, microorganisms with metabolic cycles set to half-sleep, architectural fragments that refused to be catalogued. She felt the pull of a researcher's greed, a deep and old hunger to collect and to know. Elena, meanwhile, wrestled with something quieter, a fear that knowledge would cost more than their world could afford. During one exchange, an elder of the Lattice, a creature whose filigree crown extended like a tree of glass, paused before Layla and offered something the humans had not expected, a token. It was a small shard of translucent material, pulsing faintly. This key the Lattice transmitted. It aligns with one node. It will grant guided transit to a single other world on the grid. Use it to learn. Return. Relena wanted to collapse into laughter. Haruki wanted to lock the shard in a vault on Earth and study it forever. Jamal wanted to reverse engineer it. But Layla, who had come for more than glory, felt the weight of the moment. If we accept, she said, voice thin, what's our obligation? To learn without spoiling, to return not to conquer but to tell truth, to obey containment protocols. Break the terms and the ring severs. The Lattice's meaning was simple and absolute. They had not asked for Earth's allegiance, they had demanded respect for the architecture of the network that sustained them. Part of the crew wanted to accept. Part wanted retreat. Part wanted to steal the key and run. Conversation became argument, argument became counsel, counsel became a vote anchored in the practical. Humanity was uniquely positioned to expand the network if they learned. But humanity was also new, raw, and unpredictable. The question was not technological, it was anthropological and moral. In the end, the vote was unanimous, not because they trusted the Lattice, but because they trusted their own ability to choose. They would take the shard. They would visit one world and return with evidence and understanding. They would bind themselves to a covenant of stewardship. For Layla, it felt like stepping into a larger responsibility than she had ever imagined. For Elena, it was the chance to cure her private doubt. For Haruki, an adventure whose risks he judged worth the payoff. The Lattice performed the ritual with patient grace. The shard nested into a console that opened like a flower of wired light. A corridor expanded, leading not to open space but to an aperture, a tunnel of fractal geometry that flickered with the signatures of a distant planet. The team was given instructions. They were to observe and to return within a single cycle, to take only data and one curated specimen, to bind the key with the Lattice's seal before departure. They stepped toward the aperture like pilgrims. Behind them, Kepler-452b's terrible beauty burned and cracked and whispered through the thin hull of their ship. Beneath their boots, the planet's rim shuddered with its ancient cooling. Ahead of them lay a path that could fold human history back on itself. They hesitated, not from fear of alien life but from an older fear, the knowledge that choices matter and that the smallest action could echo like a star collapsing. You must understand, the Lattice transmitted one last thing, a calm wave that slid into Layla's mind. The ways are not a highway for ambition. They are an archive, a scaffold for species to meet and be measured. The network stands because it is curated. To step through is to join the curatorship or to betray it. Layla nodded. Words failed. She put a hand on Haruki's arm and felt his pulse, a steady drum of the human species. She thought of the boy in the photograph, of Earth with its noisy politics and urgent hunger. She thought of the ledger the Lattice had shown, columns of things to be measured and learned. She felt the shard hum in her pocket, A small contained promise. They entered, the aperture swallowed them in a smell like thunder and rain. The world folded into a ring of sound. For a breathless instant the crew felt nothing but the sense of being carried through the inside of a bell. Then the other end opened, they emerged into a place that at first seemed gentle, a coastal plain under a violet sky, where flora grew in spirals and the shadows moved in soft waves. The language of the planet, if one could call it language, was a chorus of low harmonics and bioluminescent flashes. The first living things that approached were like floating tapestries of tissue and light, curious but not aggressive. As Dr. Patel knelt to take a sterile sample of an algae that shimmered like mercury, a sound rippled the air behind them, not from the planet, but from the aperture they'd come through. The way behind them, the tether of the lattice, pulsed with a pattern of warning. Back on Kepler-18b, no one had seen the warning yet. The Odysseus II's antennae picked up a transmitted signal from the portal hub, an intrusion alert keyed to their shard. The lattice had not signaled malice, but it had signaled attention. The ledger blinked, unseen and unheard by the crew on the plane. The lattice's network recorded the human fingerprints against the code of a node that had not known their species. It was a small transgression by cosmic standards, a single note out of tune in a chorus, but the network had rules, and the rules were enforced. The human presence had been catalogued, and the catalogue had passed upward. Miles below the violet sky, something elder than the lattice itself stirred at the pulse of the network, a dormant guardian, a mechanism older than the architects, designed for the singular purpose of policing breaks in protocol. The ocean on that alien world heaved, in a low, resonant cry, a sound more felt than heard, rolled across the plain. The creatures that had approached the humans dissolved their chorus into silence and drifted away. On Kepler-18b, the lattice's elder closed the petal-like console. Their placid faces, once the humans' mirror of wonder, held a shade the crew had not seen before: constraint. "You have done what you promised," the thoughtform said, stiff with the architecture of their law. But the network remembers. A keeper awakens when thresholds are bent without the clarity of old accords. Return to the hub at once. There is more to bind than we told you. Layla felt a cold bloom of dread and a hotter bloom of pride. They had been first. They had been chosen. But being first, the crew realized, meant being under the eyes of more than benevolence. It meant their species would be measured on an odd scale that did not care for reputation, only for fidelity to rules whose shape they were only beginning to see. The key they held did not only open doors, it opened a set of consequences that had been quiet for eons. They gathered the samples, sealed the shard in a containment sleeve, and prepared to return. When they stepped back through the aperture, the landscape folded again, and the lattice's hub reappeared like the final panel of a folded map. The elder's filigree crown glinted. "You will be met," it said, the lattice's tone now threaded with an institutional severity, "by one of the keepers. He is older than our order, but he enforces the accords. You must answer for your species' presence, and for the youngness of your promise." Haruki met Layla's eyes. "We came to learn," he whispered, "and we will," she answered. But inside, she understood a truth that tasted metallic: learning would not be gentle. The portal network, with its gleaming promise, had rules that could be savage. The lattice was a repository of knowledge and a jury of the ways. The keepers were something else entirely. The hub doors folded open. From the deeper corridors came a presence, not the sculpted placidity of the lattice but something vast and lenticular, like an eye made of stone and water. Where the lattice had offered the courtesy of translation in measured terms, the keeper offered a single, ancient question in a voice that predated the lattice's calm: "Why does your kind break into the network before they understand its bones?" Layla swallowed, felt the shard warm against her palm, and for the first time since leaving Earth, wondered whether the path forward would be one of communion or of a trial that the entire human race had just been invited to attend.